Hello there. You know, I don't think I've talked about the Aeropress on this channel since my dreaded apology video, which if you know, you know, and if you don't worry about it. Regardless, I'm very excited to show you a little bit more about this brewer today. It's been one that I have been using a lot more recently, so I thought it would be worth going over the 3 different ways that I like to brew with it. However, before we get into that, I do want to put one caveat at the front here. If you have ever brewed with an Aeropress before, you know that these are super versatile brewers. There are many different ways to make coffee with them, so if this ends up being a rabbit hole you want to dive into, I'm going to link a ton of resources down in the description. I highly recommend checking out James Hoffman's video series. Lance Hedrick has a ton of great videos, and in addition, the World Aeropress Championship is really good about posting their top ranked recipes, so if you want to check out some of those, which are super fun once you get used to this, I'll share that as well. However, in the meantime, I'm gonna grind some coffee and let's get right into this. I want to give a huge thank you to Trade for sponsoring today's video. In case you didn't know, Trade is a coffee subscription service and is the #1 destination in the US for both hot and cold coffee drinkers. As summer approaches, they've teamed up with 15 roasters to source and curate a special cold brew collection, with each coffee specially selected for cold extraction. Every bag is roasted to order and delivered to your front door on the schedule that works best for you. Additionally, Trade also curates the equipment you'll need, creating a one-stop shop for all your cold coffee needs. If you've been around this channel for a while, you know that every summer I get pretty dang excited for iced coffee season, and this year is no exception, which is why I'm super excited to share that for a limited time, Trade is giving away a free Hario cold brewer when you sign up for a cold brew subscription at drinktrade.com/MDC. That's the top link in the description, or drinktrade.com/MDC to get your free cold brew maker with select cold brew subscriptions. Thank you again to Trade for sponsoring today's video. Let's get started. Before we get into our 3 different brewing methods, let's quickly look at the Aeropress itself. Now, I have 2 here in front of me. This is the original Aeropress, and then this is the Aeropress Clear. All things considered, these are both pretty affordable brewers. The original Aeropress is around $40, and the Clear and multicolored Aeropresses are around $50. Functionally, these are the exact same brewer. The only difference is their material. This one, the original, is made out of polypropylene. I think I got that right. I did actually practice, but let me double check. Polypropylene. Yes, nailed it. So that's this one, and then this Clear and all the multicolors are made out of Triton. Every Aeropress breaks apart into 3 different pieces. The top one is going to be your plunger. You have the main body of the Aeropress. This one, this size in particular, has a max capacity of about 300 mils of water. However, you can kind of comfortably brew about 250 mils of coffee at max. Then, the bottom, you have this little removable filter cap. Now, to get us started, to get us nice and comfortable with this brewer, we're gonna start out with the most standard recommended way of brewing. This is what I use most often, and it's super easy. So, some other things you will need a scale, and you will also need some hot water. The water that I am gonna be using is gonna be heated within a gooseneck kettle, but with this brewer, you don't really need one. So, a regular kitchen kettle will work just fine. Additionally, when you buy an Aeropress, you get some other accoutrements. You get a little coffee scoop, you get a little stir/agitation stick, which we will be using quite a bit. And lastly, you get a nice little stack of Aeropress filters. To start off, we'll need our scale. However, notably, about halfway through this brew, we will be removing the brewer from the scale. You will need a cup, and then we're gonna brew just standard upright brewing right here. So before you get everything started with your coffee, make sure you pop a paper filter right in there. Now, there are a lot of different ways to brew with an Aeropress, a lot of different ratios. Something that is pretty common is for people to brew a tighter ratio, resulting in something that's a little bit similar to a coffee concentrate, and then they'll dilute it down with hot water to their preferred drinking ratio. However, what I find myself doing most often is just brewing at that initial ratio. So we're going to be using around a 1 to 15 ratio today. I think it's technically 1 to 15.3. We're going to be using 13 grams of coffee to about 200 mils or grams of water. The coffee I'm using here today is just like a medium light coffee. It's a little bit closer to a light roast than it is a medium. I have it ground medium fine. This is a bit finer than I would grind for like a pour over. Not crazy fine, but not super coarse either. Now, again, 13 grams is gonna go in here. One of the nice things about the scoop here is that a nice filled scoop is typically right about 13 grams. 12.8, I guess we'll be specific here. Okay, that's 13. The super nice thing about the Aeropress is due to the fact that it has markings along the side here. Once you get used to kind of eyeballing what everything looks like, this is an incredible brewer to use without a scale or anything else. It makes it a fantastic travel brewer. Okay, let's add our water. This is heated to about 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, before we add anything, I will warn you that when you pour your water in, you will initially see some drops of coffee make it down to the bottom. This is very standard for this method of brewing. It doesn't have a huge difference on the final cup, but we'll talk about it more in a second. Regardless, don't be concerned if you see some coffee dripping through. As we begin, I'll start our timer. No real need for fancy pouring. Just get your 200 in there pretty quickly. Now, I'm going to use my stir stick for about 5 seconds. Just go back and forth each way. Make sure everything is fully immersed. Now I'm going to place my plunger. We're going to let it brew. Now, you may notice that my plunger is at a slight angle. This is so we don't push any more water through the filter than necessary. We really want to make sure this is as full immersion as possible. I mean, it is full immersion, but what is down here is brewed at what it's going to be brewed at. The real key thing here is just making sure this seal is fully formed to stop any further drip through. So it's at an angle, but that's totally fine. I'm waiting until about 1 minute and 30 seconds, after which I'm gonna remove this whole setup from the scale and we're gonna start our plunge. Okay, very carefully. You don't wanna be plunging on your scale. You will be very, very likely to damage it if you do so. Now, I'm a fan of a really nice slow plunge, so we're gonna start plunging at 1 minute 30. It's probably going to take about 45 seconds to plunge, meaning our total brew time will be around 2:15 to 2:30. Straighten out your plunger. Very carefully, very slowly, stabilizing the brewer with your other hand at the bottom. We'll press down. Now, once you reach the bottom here, you will start to hear sort of a hiss as all of that water is pushed out and air is pushed through. There's a lot of debate about whether you should push through the hiss, whether you should stop as you hear the hiss. I've done it both ways. I haven't found a huge difference taste-wise, and so just to make all of my brews pretty consistent, I personally like to push through the hiss. But as with most things, I do highly recommend you do some sort of like A/B testing to figure out which you like. Okay, we're getting hissy here. Right as it reaches the bottom, we're all done. Pretty fast, pretty easy. And also, pretty tasty. Okay, that was a pretty easy, pretty standard Aeropress brew. Now, cleaning these things is super, super easy. You can technically put these in like the top rack of your dishwasher. However, it's not super necessary that often. These are really made to just be kind of rinsed and dried, and then, you know, every so often, once you see any sort of like oil buildup, give them a good thorough clean. Now, one of the really nice things about cleaning this and getting that puck out is that you can actually just kind of unscrew and then pop the puck out. You can either catch it in the filter basket or just dump it directly into your trash or compost, and then afterwards, just gotta rinse this stuff. Okay, moving on to our next style of brewing. The next thing we're gonna be doing is brewing an inverted Aeropress. This is a super, super common method of brewing. I would argue that it's probably even more common than brewing the standard way, but you most often see it used in competition. And simply enough, brewing an Aeropress inverted is gonna mean that we're gonna be utilizing the Aeropress upside down. Instead of attaching the plunger, we're gonna be attaching the filter cap. Now, what this does is it creates a full immersion brew that doesn't have any sort of spillage. So I talked about earlier with the standard Aeropress brew, you have a little bit of drip through that happens, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, especially within competitions where every single variable, every single gram or drop of coffee can make a difference, you really want to make sure you have full control over what you're brewing. So by brewing this way and then rotating afterwards, you ensure that you have a full seal all the way through. Now, one of the really kind of like funny things about this brewing style is the fact that Aeropress official will never actually endorse this due to the fact that inevitably you are going to be flinging around near boiling water. They don't want to get sued, and frankly, neither do I. So I will just say, when brewing inverted, use caution. Be careful, use common sense, just do your best. And if you brew inverted enough times, you will probably have at least one spill. It's inevitable. Regardless, let's give it a go. Now, we're setting this upside down. However, we want to make sure we still have full usage of this brewer's capacity. So when you place your plunger in, just make sure it's enough to create a seal. We don't want it super far in. We still want to be able to pour a ton of water in here. We simply place it upside down. Now, I'm going to be using the same recipe that I did before. So again, about 13 grams of coffee. Perfect. Additionally, it is helpful to make sure you have paper filter all ready to go in there. 200 mils of water once more, which directly converts to 200 grams. Once more, using our agitation stick, about 5 seconds of stirring. Timer is running. And now we attach the filter basket. Be very cautious here. Make sure you don't accidentally disrupt or push down on this. Let my timer run. I'm gonna gently move this to the side. Okay, now we are close to about 1 minute and 30 seconds of brewing. So now we have to get into a position where we can plunge, which is where the sketchy things begin to happen. So essentially what's gonna happen is we're gonna place our cup on top. We're gonna grab the entire brewer, making sure that we don't accidentally lose the seal and pull the plunger out or push it through and start shooting coffee everywhere. We're gonna maintain this shape and rotate upwards. I've done this many times, it makes me nervous every time. Okay. And then we plunge. You can just breathe a sigh of relief and go very slowly. And again, your plunging shouldn't be too forceful. This shouldn't require a lot of effort. Slow and steady wins the race. And there you have it. Cheers. A delicious, controlled, very tasty cup of coffee. However, we have one more way to brew, and this next time, we're not going to be brewing a traditional filter coffee, but instead, we're going to make something that is kind of like espresso. Not exactly, but kind of. Okay, as our final method of brewing with the Aeropress, we are going to make something that is what I'm going to lovingly call espresso style. The coffee we're going to be brewing is going to be more intense in flavor, more concentrated like espresso. It's going to have kind of that thicker, more like creamy round body like espresso, but it's not true espresso. It's espresso in the same way that mocha pot coffee is espresso. However, it's a very, very lovely brew style to use if you want to make something close to a latte. So adding steamed or cold milk to this beverage, adding water to dilute it out into something like an Americano is super tasty. Again, if you are using this as a travel brewer and you want something close to espresso, this is the way to do it. However, to do it, we will need to modify this brewer slightly from its original form, which is where this little accessory comes into play. And this right here is the Prismo by Fellow Products, and it is essentially a replacement for this filter cap that's usually here at the bottom. So we'll set this to the side. We will be using this as our third component. Now, this breaks apart into two pieces. First of all, you have a fine metal filter right here. This is 150 microns. This will be replacing our paper filter. Then the other component, you'll notice has this little valve at the bottom. This is a little pressure valve, and it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it makes sure that none of your coffee is going to leak through initially on the brew. So we're going to be brewing upright this time, but we're going to be having a full immersion the entire time through without any leakage. So it does that, and that's very nice. Additionally, what it's going to do is that this valve only opens when pressure is applied, and so it's going to force all of our concentrated coffee like through it super quickly under a lot of force, which is going to create this sort of like texture and also a sort of faux crema on top, again emulating espresso. It's very fun. It's a very cool accessory. There's a couple accessories that are kind of like this. Aeropress even makes a flow control cap themselves, but I personally really like the Prismo. Once more, a scale. Now we're changing a couple things here for this. We're going to be changing both our grind size, but also our ratio. What we're using here is going to be a lot closer to an espresso grind size. This is maybe a tiny bit coarser than what I have using on my LM right now, but this is pretty dang close to a traditional espresso grind. Additionally, we're going to be tightening up that ratio quite a bit. I'm using 20 grams of finely ground coffee right here, and then I'm going to be using about 60 mils or grams of water, 1:3 ratio. Chuck everything in there. We will need our agitation stick. We're gonna add our water. We're gonna agitate pretty vigorously for about 10 seconds, so a little bit longer. We're gonna allow it to brew for a total of about a minute, and then we're gonna plunge. This time, a little bit more intensely. I've also increased my water temp a bit. I was previously at 195 degrees Fahrenheit. I've bumped up about 10 degrees to 205. All right, 60 grams. You'll notice no dripping. Now, take your agitation stick. This coffee is pretty finely ground. It wants to stick together. It wants to clump. So just make sure it is all mixed up. Once more, seal our plunger on. Again, you'll notice even when we do that, because of that little valve inside, nothing is coming through. At this point, you can remove. We'll finish up the last 20 seconds. Okay, let's plunge. This time I'm not worried about going slow. I really want to force it through that valve. So let's just go down. And you'll notice that there is sort of a faux crema formed on top. Let's have a sip. Now, again, much more concentrated in flavor. I will admit, I would prefer to drink a traditional shot of espresso over what you get off of this brewing style. However, this is really a wonderful hack to achieving espresso drinks without an espresso machine. Again, it's espresso-like. It will work wonderfully when paired with milk or additional water. Super cool addition, and makes this a great travel brewer. I keep saying that. I do mean it though. So, with that being said, those are the 3 ways that I typically brew with an Aeropress. Again, they're not super fancy, they're not super crazy. This is a reliable and versatile brewer that makes some very tasty beverages. However, if you do want to get really fancy, if you really want to go down this rabbit hole, I very much recommend checking out some of those resources down below, especially the championship recipes. These are highly curated recipes for specific coffees, but reading through them can give you helpful tricks, and additionally, it can show you how intense these sort of competitions get. It's a lot of fun, but regardless, I am super excited to finish my cup of coffee. So, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go do that. My name is Morgan. You can find me here once a week on YouTube plus shorts, or you can find me on TikTok or Instagram almost every single day. I hope this was fun. I look forward to reading all of your Aeropress tips and recipes and moments in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.